Director Mogherini, Federica, dear President Van Rompuy, dear Mayor Defoe, dear professors, staff members, guests, and most of all, dear students and young diplomats. It is my pleasure to speak at the opening ceremony of your academic year for the College of Europe and for the European Diplomatic Academy, which the college hosts. If the College of Europe did not already exist, we would have to invent it. Your offer is unmatched in our continent. Strong academic courses on 3 campuses, each with its own distinct academic and strategic identity. This has become one of your most important drawing points. Bruges, with its focus on the European law, politics and economics of internal integration. Tirana for enlargement and Western Balkans or future integration. And Natolin, with its strength in the neighborhood, security and geopolitics, external strategy. What the 3 have in common is quality of the programs, of instruction, of the students. The European Union is proud to co-fund the college and to locate our own diplomatic academy within its walls. So first, let me congratulate the rector, the 2 vice rectors, and the board for a job well done over the years. So I believe that applause would be appropriate. I'm honored to speak today and really to have been invited at this opening precisely this year, and for 2 reasons. First, because it gives me the opportunity to pay homage to the fearless, gifted and compassionate woman, Victoria Amelina, after whom this year's promotion takes its name. And second, because this is also a chance to talk about a subject close to my heart, notably the importance of the international law, especially here in Europe and especially now. Victoria Amelina was an award-winning writer from the start of her literary career, before Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Amelina penned 2 novels and 1 children's book. But when the war began, her life took a radical turn. In her book, Looking at Women, Looking at War, she tells of her transformation from a novelist to a documentalist, and I quote, "I've done this to uncover the truth, to ensure the survival of memory and to give justice and lasting peace a chance." End of quote. While some of her friends joined the army or trained as medics, Amelina joined an NGO called the Truth Hounds that gathered evidence of war crimes. She wanted to do her bit for her country the best way she knew how. She wrote, and I quote, "And what weapon do we choose to pursue justice in the hardest times? A laptop, a camera, international law, storytelling power, or an M777 howitzer? No choice made by those who want true justice is easy, and for most of us, the outcome of our battle is still unknown." The end of quote. Amelina wrote these words sometimes in 2022. We know now the outcome of her own battle, in physical terms at least. Victoria Amelina died in July 2023 from injuries sustained in a Russian missile strike on civilian targets in Kramatorsk, Donetsk Oblast. The book I just quoted was published after her death. It is itself a testimony to the fact that the pursuit of justice is an individual choice, but always a collective endeavor. Dear students and young diplomats, the key to lasting peace is law. Amelina knew this. As a lawyer myself, that is what the European Union has always meant to me, the idea that international law, not violence, should govern the fate of countries and their people. I'm not here to give you a lecture on the law. You have professors that do this far better than I could. But let me put this into a context. International law is a broad area. Typically, it governs relations between the states and the international organizations. It encompasses treaties, trade, diplomacy, human rights, environmental law, maritime law, and such. International law, writ large, is enforced mostly by state consent, international courts, or diplomatic pressure. It is at the heart of free trade and resolving disputes. Under the umbrella of international law is international criminal law. Here we are talking not about the states, but about people. Individual accountability for decisions and actions related to the most serious crimes one could imagine. Genocide, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes of aggression. With aggression, what we are talking about is leadership crimes. Those who can commit such atrocities are those with the power to do so, heads of state of government, senior military or political leaders. Arguably, these are the root of all other war crimes, because without the decision to attack another country, followed up by troop deployments, most other war crimes could not take place. The other categories of crimes under international criminal law target foot soldiers and middle-level commanders. To build a war crimes case against them requires evidence. This needs to be gathered in a way that is admissible in the court of law. You must follow specific protocols, uncover every aspect of an allegation, and document them in a specific way. And this is where Victoria Amelina comes in. Amelina, together with hundreds of others in Ukraine, carried out these investigations with vigor. She did this knowing that it might not amount to anything. The outcome of the war was unclear at the time of her death, and it's still unclear today. But she did this in an effort to make the future a better place than her present. In Syria, long before the fall of the Assad regime, the EU was also supporting individuals collecting evidence of the regime's atrocities, including proof of torture and other crimes committed in the infamous Sednaya prison. And I want to pay a tribute to your rector and my predecessor, Federica Mogherini, who personally was behind these accountability efforts. Whether we are talking about Ukraine, Gaza, or Syria, the essence of the international law is always its universal nature. Accountability cannot be selective, or the entire system is in question. And we cannot afford to let this happen, because the ultimate power of the law is simple. It is always a chance for progress. Today's assignment, if I may, I think we owe it to Amelina, is this: what can you do to make our future a better place than the present? I will give you some ideas by way of 5 observations. First, the relationship between the international law and power politics is a tense tango. At times, norms and strategic realities align, but just as often they clash. Sometimes the law puts the brakes on power, and sometimes power violently bends the law. In the case of Amelina's Ukraine, if the law had worked, a permanent member of the UN Security Council would not have, or could not have, invaded its neighbor. It is against all international law norms, including the UN Charter. Consider how keenly some states are watching how the world behaves with Ukraine's struggle. Since we know that violating the law without accountability tends to encourage others to do the same, this contagious effect is already reason to stand up for the law, even if your rights are not currently being violated. The vast majority of countries are also small or medium-sized, and for them, international law is the only guarantor of peaceful existence, a refuge from the world where might makes right. On a personal note, I have my own experience in the outright abuse of the law. Last February, while I was still serving as Estonia's Prime Minister, I was the first head of government to be put on Russia's internal ministry's wanted list. Russia has always veiled its political repression behind the so-called law enforcement agencies. Second, international law is a human construct, not the principle of physics. As Friedrich Hayek wrote, complex social systems emerge organically from individual actions, not central planning. Instead of reverting to the traditional counter-argument that there is no legal basis for X, Y, and Z, we can create those bases. For instance, the idea of the London Charter, which ultimately led to the Nuremberg tribunals after the Second World War, first came to light as early as 1942. The war raged on with no end in sight. When I was practicing law, I wasn't paid to say, no, we can't do. I was paid for solutions. International law is not perfect and does not solve all problems, but without it, we would sink into anarchy. So we need to develop it further. And this brings me to my third observation. We can and we do come up with solutions if we choose to. The most recent example is the Special Tribunal for the Crime of Aggression against Ukraine. The International Criminal Court has the power to open formal investigation on war crimes, and if the evidence supports it and the judges authorize it, it can indict and prosecute. But there is a gap. It does not have a jurisdiction to prosecute the crime of aggression, leadership crimes. And so the idea of a special court was born. After a lot of work, it is now almost operational. When I was in Kiev 2 weeks ago, I announced €10 million of support to get the court up and running as soon as possible. Which brings me to my fourth observation. As the ICC's register said at the Bled Security Forum, where I was in this summer, international law has never been more developed, more codified, and more accessible. There are encouraging signs that the international law is growing. One example is the new special tribunal I just described. Another is that of the growing number of parties to the International Criminal Court. Now it stands at 125 states from all regions of the world, with the recent accession of Armenia and Ukraine. Yet another example came 3 weeks ago when the UN Human Rights Council decided to set up an independent investigation to gather evidence on allegations of human rights violations in Afghanistan. But eclipsing this positive news is a fifth observation, the dangerous paradox we face today. A broad assault is going on against the international legal order, human rights, internationally agreed norms, and the institutions we have established to enforce them. This includes the International Criminal Court, the ICC, which holds the perpetrators of the world's gravest crimes to account and gives victims a voice. The European Union has a long and robust policy of support of the ICC. I quote from the relevant Council conclusion. The EU's policy on the ICC is to advance universal support for the court, ensure its independence and counter threats to its effective functioning. On selective application, the EU has its flaws too. One member state has announced its intention to withdraw from the ICC, but all member states are legally bound by the decisions that are adopted by the Council, including the decision in support of the ICC and including in the case of a withdrawal. At the highest level, we have made our stance known. Just last June, the President of the European Council, Antonio Costa, called the ICC a cornerstone of international justice, while European Commission President von der Leyen reaffirmed the EU's full support for the ICC and its officials. In Brussels, we are currently looking at all available options, including specific mitigating measures for how we can make this support count for the ICC in its time of struggle. Dear students and young diplomats, whenever I travel around the world for my work, I make it a point to sit down with young people. I do this to hear your opinions, your views, and pass some of my own, because the world will soon be in your hands. In many ways, it already is, if you look at the power of Gen Z demonstrations around the world, at the influence of social media, or at the fact that yours is the generation of digital natives. You did not start your life analog like I did. So back to the question, what can you do to make our future a better place than the present? From the observations I share with you, I would derive the following ideas of action. First, take an active stand in defense of international law in general and the ICC in particular. Second, develop the law further. It is in your hands to do so. And third, be creative, innovative, and responsive to new situations that rise. You can all be truth hounds like Amelina. I'm also thinking of examples like the small group of friends who investigated the global diamond trade. Their work, which gave us the term blood diamond, led to the Kimberley process and produced a UN resolution recognizing the role of diamonds in fueling conflict. You have the benefit of good education, including from here, from the College of Europe. So use it. Define your aim, find allies, and make it happen. Or, to quote Taylor Swift, pledge allegiance to your hands, your team, your vibes. In the final chapter of her life, Victoria Amelina turned away from prose to poetry. This was not planned, she said, but compelled by the war. She commented that the reality of war eats up punctuation, the coherence of a subject. You, dear students and young diplomats, you still have your punctuation. So I advise a liberal use of a question mark and exclamation point. Thank you.